Okay, I'm just waiting for notification of this to appear on the screen. Okay, the meeting is now recording, so I begin by taking the sudeiren for the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee on Wednesday the 9th of February 2022. I can see that we have present Councillor Allison, Councillor Anderson. Do we have Councillor Brogan? No. I can see that we have Councillor Campbell, Councillor Craig. Do we have Councillor Devlin?
Councillor Walker substituting for Maureen.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walker. I can see that we have Councillor Dorman, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Gray. Do we have Councillor Harrow? No. I can see that we have Councillor Holford, Councillor Horn, Councillor Logan, Councillor Loudon. Do we have Councillor Lowe? No. Councillor McAdams? No. I can see that we have Councillor McClymont. Sorry, Councillor Brogan is just in the lobby chair. I'll just allow him into the meeting. So Councillor Brogan is now with us. Do we have Councillor McAdams? No. I can see that we have Councillor McClymont, Councillor MacDonald, Councillor McGeever, Councillor McGuigan, Councillor Miller. Do we have Councillor Razak? No. Councillor Ross? No. And I can see that we have Councillor Wardhoe, and I have apologies from Councillor Wark. Officers present today are Paul Manning, Craig Ferguson, Tom Little, Geraldine McCann, Kay McVeigh, Jackie Taylor, Brian Tees, Rhonda Leith, Gillian Cochrane, and myself, Carol Lyon. I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Carol. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting of the 10th of November 2021. That's in pages 5 to 14. Can I ask if we can approve the minute?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the Recruitment Committee on the 23rd of November. Can I ask if this can be approved?
Agreed.
Item 4 is the minutes of the Appeals Panel on 8th of December 2021. Again, can I ask if this can be approved as a correct record?
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. It takes us on to the monitoring items. Item 5 is the revenue budget monitoring for 2021 to 2022. It's on pages 19 to 30 of your document, and I'm going to ask Jackie to take us through that.
Thanks, Chair. So this is our regular report on the revenue budget for this year. This takes us from the period 1st of April to the 31st of December. And we're also providing in this report a forecast for the year to the 31st of March. So section 5 of the report covers the financial implications, and you can see there that we're reporting as part of our probable outturn exercise, which is our estimate to the end of the year, a forecast overspend of £9.9 million before transfers to reserves. Now please remember that that includes spend in relation to COVID. If I take you over to section 5.2, we're explaining that there was a request to the Executive Committee to transfer some money into reserves to be used next year. That's totalling £113,000. So that would take our overall overspend to £10.031 million. Now, I mentioned COVID a second ago. The total costs that we're expecting in relation to COVID is that same amount. So if we remove the implications of COVID, then our services are reporting a break-even position overall. Before I take you into the appendices at section 5.4, we're also reporting here what the position is to the 31st of December, and you can see the spend in relation to the service there for you. Again, the majority of our spend is in relation to COVID. The appendices show, as always, the position for the full resource and also the individual services. So on page 22, you have a summary of the overall resource position, including the impacts of COVID. And at the bottom of the page there, you can see the transfers to reserves that were approved at the Executive Committee last week. And that's in relation to funding for the National Trauma Initiative. And there's a paper later on in the pack around that. And also underspends in relation to community grants. We'll carry that forward to allow those to be used next year also. So back in terms of the recommendations at section 2, we're asking that the forecast position is noted and that the proposed environments that are in the appendices are also approved. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Are there any questions? I don't see any hands up. Can we agree the report?
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay. Takes us on to item 6, which is the capital budget monitoring 2021 to 2022. You'll find that in pages 31 to 34. Jackie's going to take us through that.
Thanks, Chair. So same time period covered for this report. So that's up to the 31st of December, but this time it's capital we're talking about. So at section 3.2, we're reporting that the budget for capital for the resource for the year is just under £3.2 million. Our spend to the 31st of December is shown at section 4.1, and that totals 695,000. So we're behind where we expect to be at this point in the year, but that reflects timing around the IT infrastructure refresh project. In the appendix on page 33, you can see the total programme there, and it's all under IT, and you can see the level of spend in the right-hand column of 695,000. We will look to maximise spend through the remaining months of the year, and any underspend will be carried forward to conclude projects into the new financial year. So in terms of recommendations, we're asking that the positions noted. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Can I ask if everybody check that their microphones are on mute, because I can hear a lot of background noise. Thanks. Catherine, do you have a question?
Yeah, it was just around the underspend, and I just wonder if part of it is the equipment for the blended meetings, because I'm really struggling to get an answer on this from anybody. The IT cross-party working group was disbanded, basically. We just got minutes, well, we just got notes. So I really want to know if we have purchased equipment and when it's got to go in and when we think we'll get round to being able to do blended meetings. Thanks.
Chair, I would probably revert to Brian Tees, or Geraldine, actually. I can see looks like she's going to come in. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. Geraldine, do you want to come in?
Yeah. Muted, first person to do it. The contract has been awarded. There is discussions ongoing with the bidder to discuss definitive timescales for putting this in, because we're trying to elicit from him, is he going to, or from them, are they going to have any supply chain difficulties? So at the moment, I can't give you a definitive timeline, but as soon as I have that, I will be happy to inform all the members of the committee.
Thanks very much, Geraldine. Monique, you have a question?
Hi, Gladys. Thanks very much for letting me in. Geraldine, it was just to ask a wee subsequent to Catherine's question then. So I understand that, well, everybody understands that COVID is an issue and it throws up things that we need to take into account. But and I understand that you are working to find out what's happening with that supply chain. But see, for us as elected members, who hopefully will be coming back, and if we're not, we will be supporting people that do come back. I think that we need to actually know that there is actually a backup plan in place, even if that backup plan is that that it means that we're fully aware as a council and the officers are prepared and the elected members are assured for the political parties that, there's a plan and this is how it's going to run. So if, for instance, I know when I'm speaking to Catherine, she was able to tell me that there is the laptops have been purchased for the next lot of councillors coming in. So that's good. So we know that preparatory work is done. But likewise, understand that you're asking the questions of that supply chain to make sure that everything is okay. But I think that it would be lax of us as elected members if we didn't say, so what is the backup plan, and that we should be told what the backup plan is so that we know that we actually are prepared. So if somebody could tell me, one, do we have a backup plan? And if not, that's fine. Can we go and get one? And 2, if we do have a backup plan, what is it, please? And thank you for your time ahead. Cheers.
Thanks, Monique.
Thank you, Councillor McAdams. And Chair, we did have a backup plan, as you know. We had the backup plan where we used the banqueting hall and we hired in the equipment, but the banqueting hall is not suitable, it's not available to us because the banqueting hall is being used for NHS vaccinations. We have investigated other uses, other places that we could go, and one of the places I had been looking at is the townhouse. But the townhouse does not have the wireless connections that we'd be able to use. So we are steamrolling ahead with the AV system. We know now that, obviously there's going to be nothing in place until after the election, and it's when after the election. We're also looking at that stage if the banqueting hall wasn't in place for immediately after the election for the first council meeting, is there something else that we can do if members wanted to have a hybrid meeting at that stage? But for the remainder of this council term, there is no solution because the rooms that we did use previously are not available to us. And as you'll recall, the surface hubs that we had been using, while they worked well, they're not a good viewing experience for live streamed meetings because you're looking at some on screen and some in the bigger inner room. So that's where the focus has been on getting the AV upgrade installed as soon as possible.
Paul, do you want to come in on that? Noticed your hand up.
Listen, happy to come in. I suppose just to going back over what Geraldine and Jackie are saying, the contract is in a place where it's been awarded, and Geraldine's point is this is the point at which discussions begin in earnest with the contractor to look at the implementation timescales and the detail of how that's going to be done. So this is entirely normal, right, in that respect. Geraldine's outlined some of the plans that could be put in place, right, across the period of time, right, up to the next election. At the moment, what we're planning on doing is having the solution in place, which is what Geraldine's described. But if there needs to be a contingency developed, we will do that, right? And members will be kept up to date and informed on the way ahead. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Paul. Any other questions? Joe?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to follow that up. Is the point not that we've already been here before and had dates that have slipped? So I'm just wondering, have we got a firm date beyond which we know things will not slip any further?
Paul, do you want to come into that?
Sorry, hello. The answer Geraldine was given was around, this is where we are in the project timescale, right? So we've awarded a contract and we've done that within the timescale that we had. There would now be an installation. There's works that need to be done and taken through in committee room 1 and in the council chamber. And this is in order to facilitate hybrid meetings, right? So like this, but also with an opportunity for in-person attendance if people wish to come in and do it. What has to happen now that we've got an appointed contractor is that we start to go through a process of getting in place detailed arrangements for this to happen. So we've now got somebody in trained to do this. Right, what we will need to see, and this is the point Geraldine was making, there might be an impact on the implementation timescale depending on whether we can get the equipment within the timescales that we had planned for. Right, now hopefully we can, but there's a chance that we might not. Right, if we can't, that will become apparent, right, over the coming weeks, and we'll put in place some form of contingency arrangement. But the point that Geraldine's making is that at the moment we're planning to get things in time for the beginning of the new council. If that changes, I'll come back to members and let them know.
Thanks, Paul. I understand exactly where Monique and Joe are coming from, because some organisations are getting for hardware, and they're getting up to 26 weeks waiting time, turnaround time. But as Paul said, he'll keep us up to date on that. Any other questions? Catherine?
No, I just wanted to add, and you might not like this, but I think we've had quite a long time to sort this out. We've known for a long, long while that this has been needed, and it's been on that agenda for such a long time. I'm really disappointed that we're still not really any further forward, to be honest.
Paul, do you want to come in on that?
Listen, I note Councillor McClymon's point. In terms of being further forward, come back to previous briefings we've given to members, we had a tender to let, it's been done, and a contractor's been appointed, and we now set out on the implementation. So there is progress. Thanks, Chair.
I think from an IT point of view, I understand how long the tender exercise can take. Is there any other questions? Monique?
It was just quickly, Gladys, it was just to say the reason why we were bringing it up, it wasn't actually like a political point. It was more a case of all the parties are going to come back and, God willing, there's going to be a lot of us that are back in, but there's going to be a lot of new people as well. So it wasn't actually getting brought up to basically annoy officers or say anybody wasn't doing their job or anything else. It was actually to give comfort to the elected members that were here, and also for, the ones that will be welcomed in warmly, in May. So it was just, we were really just trying to actually find out what the actual situation was. So it was to give comfort. So it was definitely not to annoy or anything else. It was just really so that we knew what the situation is. So we do appreciate everything that everybody is doing, and we do appreciate the fact that timescales sometimes work against us, when there's 26 weeks lead-ins and whatever else. It was just so that we actually knew that there was a plan in place, so that we could give comfort to other people that were asking us questions. So thank you, I appreciate you letting me back in, okay?
No, you actually came across, it was about concern, totally understand, totally get it. Joe, you want to come in?
Yeah, and I don't want to. I think the points that Monique makes there are valid. I don't want to. Don't want to ruin the atmosphere, but I would make the point that it was a manifesto commitment from 5 years ago, and we're at the end of the term, and there wouldn't be any webcasting of meetings were it not for the fact that the pandemic came along and put us all online. So that is somewhat a material consideration, but my point, to come back, to take the politics out of it and come back to the fundamentals, is that, as Mick says, there's going to be a new council soon, and I don't think we want that new council to start with the experience that we have had over the past sort of couple of years. We want that new council to start with the opportunity to interact in a safe way, and I think that the absolute latest that I would personally be prepared to see this happen is by the first meeting of that new council. That is the absolute latest. If it's any later than that, then I think people should be held to account.
Peter, you want to come in?
Yeah, not to be too political, Joe, but there was no promise in any manifesto to have blended meetings. The manifesto was about opening up the council, and that's just exactly what we've done through our streaming of live meetings, through opening up the papers for consideration a week before the actual meeting itself, rather than the 3 days that was before that. So I think you're probably just misreading our manifesto promise.
I think we've covered that one well. Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. That takes us on to item 7, which is the Finance and Corporate Resources Workforce Monitoring. That's September to November 21, and Kay's going to take us through that. You'll find it on pages 35 to 42. Kay.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first of today's workforce monitoring reports, as you say, covering finance and corporate for the period September to November. And in terms of where the resource position was in relation to absence at November, we were sitting at 4.3% for the resource, which, if you take that forward in terms of trends, would give us a percentage of 3.4% for the year, or 8.2 days. But as we know, with the benefit of hindsight, round about December and January, those figures were quite poor as well. So I would expect those figures to increase a bit for the next report. You'll see within the content of the report, we have got the data that was taken at the 22nd of December, which gives an absence rate of 8.17%, 3% of which was directly COVID related, either through sickness or through isolation over that period as well. So I think what we see in our workforce monitoring reports, and I'll maybe go into this in a little bit more detail in the next report, which is the council-wide, is just a growing trend in terms of underlying absence in addition to the COVID-related absence that we can see. And that's not just a South Lanarkshire Council phenomenon, that's across the piece that we can see that. In terms of the other aspects of the report, we had 5 leavers over the period, and we managed to carry out exit interviews with 40% of those leavers. And other than that, there's nothing of particular note within the finance and corporate element of the workforce monitoring. So I'm asking the committee to note the employment information. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Kay. Graham, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Kay, this is finance and corporate resources. It's not social work or housing or education, where staff have to be, out of the coalface. Most of the staff here are, tend to be office roles, behind a PC, etc. Why are we seeing so many absences when the vast majority of self-isolation and COVID doesn't require you to be off sick?
Thanks. I'll reply, Chair, if you're all right with that. So in terms of COVID absence, so sickness, then the finance and corporate are, you're right, they're not necessarily out and about to the same extent, delivering a frontline service, but the majority of COVID sickness is community related, so they are still exposed within a community setting. You're right, in terms of self-isolation for finance and corporate, most of our employees have been perfectly able to continue working from home. They have the devices that they require in order to do that. And that is why when you look at the council-wide figures in the next report, you'll see finance and corporate resources perform well in comparison with others. But it doesn't mean that finance and corporate resources are immune from the other things that are impacting on absence at this point in time. So again, I'll point in the next report to the increasing trend round about psychological, musculoskeletal absence within the trends that we can see. And as I say, kind of some of that is indirectly COVID related, and that's a bit of an emerging trend that we're having a look at as well. So hopefully that kind of addresses this particular point, Councillor Campbell.
It's just disappointing, Kay. That's all, compared to what I'm seeing outside the council. But hey, it is what it is.
I tend to agree with it, Graham. I've seen, I'm office based and I have seen so many absences, and it's all sorts. It's almost like everything's been built up, after being tied down for so long.
But again, with all due respect, that's still council. It's still local authority. I have not seen any of the businesses I work in. I've seen none of that.
No, I actually work. I work for a Canadian global organisation. I don't work for local government.
Okay.
Jenny, you have a question?
I do, thanks, Chair. Actually, Kay referred to one of the questions I was going to ask was the increase in the musculoskeletal absences and also psychological ones. I just wondered, because Kay's referred to them, how's this going to be looked at to see what the cause of it and what kind of support is going to be put into employees? I was thinking particularly of DSEs and things like that for employees working from home, etc. So just like a wee answer on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. If you're okay, Chair, it's an interesting point, Councillor Gray, and we're seeing we're beginning to see some national information come out round about that. So that the musculoskeletal point, and this is kind of part of why we've got an underlying increase in trend in other absences, particularly musculoskeletal. You may find there's been a delay in people accessing support over the period. Perhaps if I think about the experience of those of us who have maybe been working from home during periods when we've been asked not to come into the office, we're maybe not moving as much as we should do, and therefore that's having an impact in terms of musculoskeletal absence. I think there's a lot still to come, a lot of learning through the pandemic and the ways of working when we get. I think it was interesting to listen to the conversation earlier about hybrid working, because these are points that are being wrestled with across Scotland in different workplaces. You kind of, some of us have a very good setup at home and can work very effectively, others don't. Moving to a more hybrid model allows us to accommodate a bit more of the workforce being within the workplace, and therefore having better equipment and a better setup with which to work. But that is just musculoskeletal. Similarly, there's a delay in other medical processes that would normally be taking place, and that is underpinning some of our other absence, both within this resource and others. In terms of what...
Sorry, can I come back in there, Chair, if that's all right? Just to quick question. I just wondering, especially around the musculoskeletal incidences, has there been DSEs done for employees who are working from home to make sure they have the proper equipment? Because I know that would be done in the workplace, and I just wonder if that is continuing for every employee at home, because I think that may have an effect on these absences.
Yep, thank you. So this has been a tricky thing throughout the pandemic, because it's hard for me as a line manager to impose myself in somebody else's home and go and carry out an assessment. So I'm relying on individuals to do that themselves. At the start of the pandemic, when we entered lockdown, people were told they had to go home, and they wouldn't necessarily have had the right equipment or setup in place. Since then, we've gradually moved equipment from the office to a home setting. So most of our employees who haven't got something suitable will have taken home an office chair, the monitor, etc., and get that set up at home. It's still not ideal for some employees, and that's why the hybrid working is particularly important to us, because it allows some individuals to come back in. In terms of offering support, we have got advice and guidance, and we've got the right kit now to be able to purchase to make sure folk are set up properly. But I think it would be fair to say there's still some room to go there, and that's why we intend to survey our workforce again and ask them about their comfort in working from home and what else would improve that experience for them. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Kay. Margaret?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Kay and Councillor Gray has said, but we're way overdue for a lot of that stuff in terms of, providing appropriate equipment and support. There's lots of issues around working at home, musculoskeletal, eyesight problems, working in laptops that are not suitable for detailed and spreadsheet work, all of that. And I suppose we need to also be asking the question, are we working in partnership with the trade unions here? Because the trade unions should be a bit more out in front of this than they are at the moment, because there's numerous issues, along with the mental health issues, the isolation issues, your circumstances at home, as you've touched on, Kay. It's all right if you're sitting there with your office and other than you might be sitting in a bedroom with a laptop in your knee. So we're way overdue for this, and if we're moving towards the hybrid setup, then there needs to be formal agreements to make sure that these workers who choose to stay at home are actually protected. And I would say we're really way overdue in that. And just in relation to hybrid meetings in terms of the council, we need to be back as a council. There needs to be a physical presence. You cannot run a virtual council. And hopefully with no further variance, and if we continue to move in a positive direction, then I agree with my colleagues and previous councillors, we need to be held accountable if we're not actually physically back here as a presence when the new council is in play. So thank you, Chair, for letting me in.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just reassure members that we are working very closely in partnership with our trade union colleagues, and we've been meeting throughout the pandemic, and as guidance has changed, we've agreed a way forward. It's been, I think, a good example of partnership working. I think we continue to learn and we continue to improve. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we need to see those policies and agreements. Thanks.
Okay, that takes us. Oh no, can we agree the report now?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. That takes us on to item 8, which is the council-wide workforce monitoring, September to November, and pages 43 to 64. And Kay's going to take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. It's the same period, Council's workforce monitoring, but this time covering the whole of the Council, so there is a deal more information contained within the report. Council-wide, the absence percentage at November was 6.9%, and that takes us to a projected over 5% for the year. The bullets at 4.1 show a substantial increase in a number of areas in relation to absence. Some of those we've covered in the previous item, mainly in relation to psychological absence, musculoskeletal absence, of course respiratory as you would expect, but also stomach, bowel, blood, etc. So I think, as I said in relation to the previous report, we already know what happened in December and January, so I do expect the position to worsen as a result. And again, the 22nd of December data is there in the report, but I think just to illustrate the point, particularly during the December period, at the peak of the current variant absence, we had over 1,000 employees absent, either directly through COVID or through having to self-isolate, and that created quite a lot of activity for everybody over the festive period, trying to make sure that services were maintained over that period. In terms of the support activity around about that, Section 5 takes you through our occupational health actions, and you can see there that we are showing an increase across almost all of our supports within that activity. Section 6 takes you through accidents and incidents, and we have an increase in terms of minor accidents and incidents. I would ask members to be aware that their activity would have been different over this time last year from what it is in the period that we're reporting on, and we're also reporting in a better way in terms of those minor accidents and incidents, so we are encouraging individual employees to report that themselves. In terms of leavers at Section 8, you'll see, although turnover remains low, it is an item that we are closely monitoring due to the current labour market conditions. And nationally, we can see a downturn in terms of applicants per role, down by a third in comparison with this period last year. Helpfully, we did manage to hold exit interviews with 42% of leavers. In terms of recruitment, we had just under 3,500 applicants over the period, and the detail of that is contained in Appendix 14 of that report. So you can see the percentage information that people were requesting. And again, Chair, I'm asking for the employment information to be noted.
Thanks very much for that. Can I ask, there's a couple of microphones that are opened, and it sounds like something's been strangled. if everybody could just have a wee check of their mics. There's still one opened. I'll message you privately. I'm not mentioning any names at all, Mr. Allison.
Mine is muted on the headset.
It's still showing up on the screen. Monique, you have a question?
Yeah, Gladys, it was actually about the last item, but I can relate it to this one. It was when Margaret Walker was talking, when Kay was talking about the agreements and how we were working very closely with the trade unions, and Councillor Walker had asked if we could catch sight of a copy of those agreements. I just wanted to reiterate for this item, because it's obviously council-wide, whereas obviously item 7 was just about finance. Could we see a copy of those agreements that's between the council and the trade unions, please?
Thank you, Chair. You'll not see a formal agreement. I think that's what you're expecting to potentially see. These are part of ongoing discussions with the trade unions. So we've got ways of working. We've got the service reintroduction toolkit, which has an element of that within it. and you've also got kind of the arrangements that individual services and resources will have put in place for a variety of work settings. So you won't see something that brings all of that together, Councillor McAdams.
Chair, because I subsequently asked then, it's just, so obviously there's a lot of work then that's been done in the background then, Kay, so thank you for that and for working with the trade unions. So there's obviously something, there's like some email format or whatever that said to them, for home carers, here's the link for this, for finance, here's the link for this. Is that something that as councillors we could peruse so that we could actually see, and it means that when we're taking things forward, we can then take that into consideration to make sure that we are then making the right decisions based on the full picture, rather than us not having that at our fingertips for us to take the proper things into consideration, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose what I'm saying is there's not one single thing, so that would be quite a collation for a different set of resources. I think what might be useful to look at is the hybrid working guidance that is just out nationally, and therefore see what we can translate out of that into an overarching framework for the council, so different areas can take out different aspects. The difficulty you've got with some of those arrangements is the kind of very individual setup within folks' houses, but also kind of personal preferences from individuals about their ways of working, for example. So it's hard. I can perhaps look at the framework and bring something together there for yourselves, but it is hard to be definitive for the individual circumstances.
No, that's fine, and thank you very much for that. I can see that Councillor Walker's got her hand up. Gladys could ask for a bit of freedom then to the fact that I know that Margaret will be able to put it perhaps better than what I was, to make sure, because she'll be more succinct than me because it's her bag. So I will let Margaret jump in and correct all the things that I need corrected on, and I will take it like on the nose or the chin or whatever. But thank you.
You're very welcome. Kay, can I ask, is this something that would be brought up if it was an issue on the JICF?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, that's probably where you'd bring an output to kind of the position that happens just now. Yeah. I suppose is just trying to accommodate a whole host of different circumstances, whether it's the way things are working or people's personal circumstances, etc. And the service reintroduction meetings that we have with the trade unions is there availability to raise any particular issues, whether it's about hybrid working or flexible arrangements or anything else that's related to the kind of services coming back in. At present, I'm not seeing much coming through that. Kind of, we work very well together, and if there are individual problems, they tend to be very localised, and we go and sort them.
Thanks very much, Kate. Margaret, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Not at all, Monique. You put it just as well as I could, but it's just there are things you can be fairly definitive about. For example, the hours that people are spending on a screen, have multiplied tenfold, 100-fold from what they were 2 years ago. The number of meetings that people are expected to cover in a week, again, have multiplied 10, 20 times. Whereas before in a day, you could, get in 3-4 meetings. Some people are maybe doing upwards 8, 9, 10, and they're doing them in some instances well beyond 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. And the hybrid model, I suspect, that's not going to change in terms of screen time, because as far as I'm aware, there's no plans to, bring back actual meetings, where you actually see somebody face to face or go out somewhere for a meeting. My educated guess is that is not going to happen for various reasons. One, the productivity element of it, you're getting far more out of people in terms of the numbers of meetings that they cover than you did previously. And also the cost of buildings, rationalisation, all the rest of it. Now that's fine, but there needs to be protection for staff in that. And it needs to be clearly stated that You spend so many hours on a screen, then you have a break. You're entitled to a lunch time. Try and avoid doing these meetings back to back. I mean, I've been sitting here since 9 o'clock this morning. My back's starting to get sore. So there are things that should be definitive and there are things that should be laid out in writing. So I don't agree that we can't have something that covers the massive amount of change that's happened and the impact that it's had over staff in the last couple of years, and the hours and hours that they're spent sitting in one position looking at a screen for sometimes 8, 9, 10 hours a day. So yes, I think we can and should have something in writing. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come back in there.
Yes, I'm not to come back in.
I'm absolutely not disagreeing with you, Councillor Walker. And as I said, the hybrid working guidance that's just out, we're going to use that to build on what we've observed as poor practice. So exactly what you're talking about, you're going straight from one meeting into the next without a break. So we will develop something on the back of that guidance. It will go through our usual trade union consultation, and I would expect them to bring their own information to that. Similarly, when we conduct the survey again with the workforce, I would expect them to bring what they want to see maybe covered within that guidance. I think the other thing that we've probably had over the piece is people working at a pace, because we've been in the middle of the pandemic and we've been in crisis mode, and we need to find a way of getting people into a pace of working that keeps them fit and well for the future. But I would absolutely agree with you, Councillor Walker.
Thanks very much, Kay.
Thank you.
Catherine?
Thanks, Chair. No, it was just to make a plea, actually, on behalf of the councillors, because I think we've been left out in all this. And no, today I'm going to be on a screen, have a couple of breaks. I'm going to be on the screen for 11 hours. It's just too much. That's why I'm keen to get the blended working, and I can come back into the office when it's safe to do so. But we have been left out, I feel. We did have a survey. I filled my survey out. I don't know who else did. Never had any feedback back from that survey, and there were issues. And I know from being a trade union official at some point in my life that there are certain health and safety things that they should be doing for us, and you have got a duty of care to us as well. So it's just to remind you, it's not just the staff. Please remember, you've got councillors that need the same attention. Thanks.
Catherine, I think when Margaret was talking about 11-hour meetings, she was talking about us rather than the staff. Eileen, you've got a question.
Thank you. I'll not hold it up. I'm just going to agree with yourself, Catherine, and Margaret. I think there's a new council going to be coming within the matter of, 2 months now, and they will obviously be the people who will set out all the new things that the council is going to do on hybrid working and etc. And it is a plea because I think even some of the councillors, you feel obliged when you were going to the office. You could go at 9 and put down your computer at 3, and you didn't feel guilty if that was your working day. You were coming back. I actually get agitated and anxious if I'm not on this computer day and night answering people, because I feel, I'm here, I better answer it. I think working from home has increased our workload, is, like you said, very, very much so. And people, you feel obliged to be answering people. So I think in all this, good working practices for councillors should be looked at seriously, especially since we're going to be coming into a new council anyway in May. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eileen. Mark, you've slipped in there.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. It was just actually, I'm not going to echo what's been said so far, but I found that Margaret, Eileen, and Catherine, I completely agree with you. And one of the things that I thought hasn't been mentioned that I wanted to just chip in with is that the survey that was brought up, I actually said that I found the move to online learning completely interfered with my ability to do my job. And I think so much of being a councillor is about forming working relationships with people that you're maybe in a different party to, and it's about hearing other viewpoints and having time to consider them. And that has almost disappeared entirely as a result of not being physically present. And for the next council, I think that'll be really damaging if we don't get back to that. And, you know, including if there is a kind of default towards, oh, it's okay to dial in. I mean, it's always okay to join, you know, online if you need to. But if the default becomes that, then the council really will lose something. And I think that probably applies to staff doing their jobs as well, that if you don't work with somebody on a regular basis, then it's difficult to understand their perspectives, and it's so much easier to do that if you do meet up in a room. And, you know, I've never always been a huge fan of meetings for meeting's sake, and I find a lot of them to be quite frustrating at times, and I'm sure others do as well. But there is some benefit to being present, and I would really hope that we get back to that, and that the council doesn't move, either for elected members or for staff, towards, oh, the default is to dial in. I think that really is harmful, both to productivity as well as to the physical health and mental well-being of staff and councillors too.
I think given the investment in the hybrid system, I think it would, you know, it's, you know, on the cards that we definitely will be moving to a blended type of system where we'll be in the office, or for people that it makes it easier for them rather than travelling, that they can do it from, you know, wherever they can log in from ever. Eileen, you've still got your hand up. Have you got another question? Or is it just a legacy? Okay. Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us on to item 9, which is the Treasury Management activity, and it's on pages 65 to 72, and Jackie's going to take us through that.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. So this is our third report of the year on Treasury Management, following the same format and information as we've reported previously. So at section 4, we're covering market performance. Now, we have reported here that the Bank of England put up their base rate in December to 0.25%. I've actually put it up again to 0.5%, just an update there in terms of that paragraph. Our debt position is covered at section 5. Over the page, on page 66, you can see a table that shows our debt position. And at section 5.4, we're covering our borrowing requirement. Now, we have reported before and continue to report that we haven't taken any long-term borrowing so far this year. Instead, we've been using our cash balances to fund capital spend, and we will have to borrow in due course to replace those balances going forward. That's the same position as I reported last time. An investment activity is reported from section 6. This is where we manage our cash balances and place our deposits. As councillors know, we have an investment strategy report that's approved by council every year, and that details included permitted investments and deposits. The table over at section 6.6 on page 67 summarises where we've deposited our money this year. And again, reflecting what I've reported earlier in the year, we're placing our money in the UK Government's deposit facility and other local authorities and the Bank of Scotland and the Royal Bank of Scotland. That's the limit of our counterparties this year. Linked to where we deposit our money is how we manage risk. Again, our investment strategy details down how we will manage risk on our deposits. And part of that includes looking at the credit ratings of banks and building societies and other counterparties that we place money with. And the tables on page 68 summarise those credit ratings. And it reports, again in line with what we've reported in the rest of the year, that the majority of our money is deposited with counterparties of a very high credit quality. So the government's deposit facility, other local authorities, and the Bank of Scotland and the Royal Bank of Scotland. Over at section 9 of the report, we include our treasury management indicators that we're required to report on, and that includes indicators around limits for debt and on our maturity structure of our debt. And again, we're reporting in line with what we've reported in the rest of the year, that we're in line with our indicators. And at section 10, we're just giving an update on our banking services contract, which expires at the end of March. We've had an open tender process, and as a result of that process, the Royal Bank of Scotland were awarded the contract for banking services. terms of recommendations, Chair, we're asking that the positions noted. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Eric, you have a question?
Yes, just briefly. I'm sure we're fine, but I want some reassurance. Obviously, interest rates have gone up. Gilt rates have been spiking quite alarmingly. Deferring our debt borrowing to later in the year, what effect is that likely to have on the cost of our borrowing over the longer term? Bearing in mind we'll be taking on fixed debt for 20 to 40 years, fixed price debt.
I'll take that, Chair. Just in terms of our projections and our predictions for borrowing, we factored in projected rates for borrowing rates, and we're still within the limits that we had estimated our borrowing would be taken at. So the recent movements in gilts hasn't affected our projections there.
Could I just briefly come back? But
Absolutely.
That is going to incur extra cost. That cost of the extra higher interest rates will hit our revenue budgets in future. That's already factored in, I presume, in the 2022-2023 budget figures. Yes or no is fine on that. I'll be happy with that.
Our budgets will accommodate our borrowing, and our projections did expect an increase in our borrowing rates anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ian, you've your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. In 5.1, it says the Council began the year with debt of £1,005.5 million. Is that £1 billion? Depending on whether you're American or British. That
Yes,
seems
that's
a lot of debt.
That's correct. That's the level of debt that we have, and that reflects the capital programmes we've had over recent years, including our primary school modernisation programme. So yeah, that's in line with what we've reported previously.
Okay, right. Okay, £1 billion. No. Look at them. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, that takes us on to our items for decision. And item 10 is the revenue collection and approval for write-offs. That's pages 73 to 78. And Craig's going to take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. So the report advises committee of the collection performance 10th of December last year, latest position in respect to the business rates incentivisation scheme, and also seeks approval for write-offs. Section 4 of the report covers the current collection performance, with the first table in Appendix 1 providing a breakdown of the various income streams. In relation to council tax, that's currently ahead of target by 1.1%. In relation to non-domestic rates, current performance levels are equal to current target, and in relation to sundry debt, it's currently ahead of target by 4.3%. Section 5 covers the arrears collection performance, and this time the second table of Appendix 1 provides more detail there. So in relation to council tax, that's ahead of target by just over £500,000. In respect to non-domestic rates, it's ahead of target by £824,000. And in terms of sundry debt, that is marginally behind target by 0.3%. Section 6 was updated in relation to the business rates incentivisation scheme. As previously advised to the committee, the Scottish Government confirmed the scheme is suspended for both 2021 and also 21-22 due to the impact of COVID. Section 7 details the individual proposals for write-off for committee's consideration. That covers council tax, non-domestic rates, the bid levies. I also would highlight as well at 7.7 the figure in relation to the former occupants of homeless temporary accommodation at 2.7 million. Just to emphasise, as I have done previously in relation to this debt, that the value of the write-off is fully provided for by housing services, and further write-offs are expected as housing themselves continue to review the outstanding accounts there. So I can refer committee back to the recommendations that the collection in terms of the revenue side is noted, the current position in respect to the incentivisation scheme is noted, and write-offs as detailed at bullet point 3 in section 2 be approved as listed. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. Eileen, do you have a question?
Thank you.
you've muted us.
No, it was like ping pong there. It was on and off and off and on. Sorry. Yeah, thanks very much for the report. On page 76, 7.7, and indeed 7.6, page 70. It's page 75. I don't know what I put that for. Anyway, I understand about house and rent associated charges. We have written them off in years and years and years gone by, and we're always told that they're never really written off. People's debt does not go away. If somebody comes back for a house, etc., and they've left rent and various different stuff, then before they can be rehoused, they will be asked about the debt and the repayment of such. Understand that, but the rent for the homeless accommodation, I mean, that is actually quite eye-watering. We've been asked to actually write off £2,741, 2,741,202.31. I find that, it's quite staggering, and I understand that for the past 2 years we've had the pandemic, and our housing stock for priority housing has virtually doubled. People have come and people have gone. I also know that rapid rehousing that the Scottish Government set up even just before the pandemic, where we were sort of lumped in with the cities. We were actually doing very well for ourselves in working out our priority housing, but the cities were lagging behind and people were not being housed as they should. Probably the volumes and various different stuff. So there's been a whole lot of different things, but the part saying that housing is taking care of it under their legislation, I would hope that it's not going to come from people paying their rent timely and in time and doing what they should do properly. I hope that the Scottish Government is stepping in to help with COVID, and it hasn't really been explained and detailed out very well. Anybody reading that just as a report, and Mr. Craig says, well, we're putting the reports out very quickly, so people will have it in their domain. But I would hope that it could be explained a bit better. I hope that the Scottish Government is actually going to step in somewhere along the line on the fact that we had to and it's not just the fact that we are setting up a homeless unit or a priority unit, I like to call it, for someone. It's the furnishing of and the various different stuff. And I also want to know in anywhere, is there debt taken into consideration? Because I know this has happened twice and it will have happened elsewhere, where tenants have went in and actually virtually, did a lot of damage, then moved away, and we were left again to pick up the tab. So there's a whole lot of different things there. But I find that quite staggering that, it was £2 million. Well, in fact, it's virtually touching into £3 million. And I would like if the figures could be broken down a bit. Was it just the pandemic that shoved it right away up? Was it before that because of the quick turnovers? Was it the increase of the houses that we had to put in? And obviously, as I said, to furnish. And in among that, although the housing is going to take care of it according to that, I'm sincerely hoping it's not coming for council house rents, because if I was a council house rent payer, I'd be very, very angry. So I hope, as I say, there's something there from the government as well. And I'd be pleased if that could be answered. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. In terms of a bit of background here, what we're dealing with here effectively is a review of historical debt. And in this scenario here, it relates to former tenants of homelessness accommodation. And effectively, Housing College went through a programme of review looking at this debt. In the case of the 2.7 million presented today for consideration, the vast majority is prescribed debt. There is obviously still debt remaining that forms part of the remaining review programme being completed by Housing at present. But I would say that debt by its very nature is something that rolls on, and the overall debt position can change month by month, year on year, as tenancies change, its different levels of payments are applied, and also its benefits also are applied as well to the charges for temporary accommodation for homelessness. So I think in terms of the COVID impact, I'd say that's not really something that is represented through the 2.7 million. The 2.7 million proposed write-off today just reflects really, if you like, a review of that accumulated debt. And instead, I'd effectively describe it as being dormant. It's fully provided for as part of the homelessness business plan. So within the financial assumptions contained within that plan, they do assume a level of non-collection, a level of write-off, and effectively that provision can then cover write-offs like the one proposed today in relation to the 2.7 million. I think, Councillor, in relation to your wider questions around Scottish Government support, I would say that's really probably a matter really for housing colleagues to consider, and happy to take away any kind of questions around that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Folks, I realise that it's 3 minutes past 3. There's a lot of hands going up. I know Jim, Jerry, you're waiting. Catherine, you've come in. But I'm going to take a break for the interpreters because we've been going for an hour. So I suggest 8 minutes past is a ridiculous time. 10 past. We'll have a break till then.
Chair, can I just say I can't come back because I've got a meeting with a constituent at 3:30. So I'll put my question on the chat. Thanks.
No bother. Thanks, Catherine. You're muted, Carol.
Apologies, talking to myself. Okay, I'll just quickly run through the sedering. So do we have Councillor Anderson?
Here.
Councillor Allison?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Brogan?
Here.
Councillor Campbell? No, I'll come back to him at the end. Councillor Craig?
Present.
We have apologies from Maureen Devlin. Isabel Dorman?
Here, sorry, Carol. Councillor Campbell put a message in the chat to say that he was having to leave for another meeting and he was trying to get back in later.
Yeah.
Okay, I see him in the lobby there. I'm just admitting him back in. Councillor Campbell, are you back with us?
I am indeed. Thanks a lot. Sorry about that. I just had another meeting, Teams meeting I had to rush to for 10 minutes, but I'm back.
No problem. Thank you. Councillor Fagan?
Here.
Councillor Ferguson?
Very exciting time.
Yep, here.
Thank you. Councillor Gray?
Here.
Councillor Harrow?
Here.
Councillor Holford?
Yeah.
Councillor Horn?
Yeah.
Councillor Logan? No. Councillor Loudon?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Councillor Logan was here. It was just our mic was muted.
Our mic was muted, no problem. Thank you. Councillor McAdams?
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald?
Yes, I'm here, thanks.
Councillor McGeever?
I'm here, thanks very much.
Councillor McGuigan?
Here.
Councillor Miller is here. Sorry, and Councillor McClyman is now apologies. And apologies from Councillor Isaac, Councillor Ross. Councillor Wartaw?
Sorry, here.
Thank you. Apologies from Councillor Wark and Councillor Walker.
Here.
Thank you. That's everyone. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. Do you need to restart the recording?
That's us ready, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Jim McGuigan.
Thanks, Chair. It's actually following on from what Eileen was actually talking about. And yes, I agree that if the figure had actually been over a 1 year period as opposed to a longer period, it might not have been quite as staggering. With regards to the sort of homeless situation, there will probably be a lot of other issues behind the non-payment, which obviously that Craig's not going to be answered because it actually falls into other departments, other resources to sort of try and deal with the situation. But one of the things that we're actually doing and trying to do is that to combat the DWP situation of if you have no fixed abode, then you don't get anything. So we're giving them the fixed abode, and essentially that should then give them the facility to get the finance from DWP appropriate to their position. Problem we've got here is that, and I'm sure that Craig and his team are doing everything in their powers to try and recover the money, is that, and there's a percentage of people who have been in that homeless situation to become naturally evasive. And that unfortunately means that it becomes part of their nature to essentially to evade paying certain things. And that this is a sort of a natural aspect that needs to be changed, and that I'm sure that there are a lot of agencies that work with people who have been in that situation to try and get them into a better place whereby they are being made to be responsible for their payments, the debts that they have, the bills that they've got to pay, and essentially really just for their own position. And obviously their health situation comes into play here. But I think that this is maybe a question that needs to be dealt with by other resources and not necessarily by the council tax collectors, and that I agree agree to a large extent with what Eileen was saying, but I don't think that this is actually something which is going to come from government, because essentially that the housing situation is seen as being a council matter, and it should then remain in that situation. But certainly that it's a bit of a staggering figure, almost £3 million, and that I think it would have been better if it had been done over a shorter piece of time, and then we wouldn't have been hit with this figure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I'm not sure there was a question in there or an answer for Craig to come back with. So I'll move on to Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. Not to reiterate Jim and Eileen the whole time, but I also agree it's quite a staggering figure. What I'm looking to see is this figure, has this been increased from a previous time? Is there an increase? Is there a trend moving upwards? And does it look if there's going to be I know you maybe can't answer it because this is a housing issue rather than France and Corp, but just to kind of wonder, is this a trend that's going to increase? Is basically what I'm asking. Thank you.
Craig.
Yep, thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Chair. As I mentioned earlier, effectively this is part of an exercise looking at historical debt position. So taking into account the write-off proposed today, there will still be a figure of around 5.8 million of outstanding debt in relation to former tenants of temporary accommodation, and that's come back for tenancies covering many years. And of course, while the persons within the tenancy, attempts are made obviously by housing colleagues to make sure that as much of that rent can be recovered as is reasonably possible, while making sure the appropriate support is there to prepare the tenant for a mainstream property in the future, and obviously essentially to hopefully then break that kind of cycle potentially of perpetual homelessness. So effectively what I'm saying is there will be more proposals coming to the Finance Committee, who effectively have the ability to accept proposals in relation to debt write-offs. That's not something that's afforded to Housing Committee. And picking up on Councillor McGuigan's point, in essence, a lot of the activity here does revolve around the work performed by housing colleagues. But essentially, the report we provide to yourselves as the Finance and Corporate Committee is essentially the vehicle for seeking authorisation for the write-offs as proposed, and clearly the opportunities here just now to obviously kind of further understanding around the level of write-off, what might happen next, and certainly there will be further write-offs coming to this committee, as I say, as housing progress through their review exercise. So that gives a kind of a reasonable response to your questions, Councillor.
Thanks very much, Craig. Monique, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just to say that obviously for this agenda item, we're used to this coming to committee, and we're used to and for the recommendations under 2.1 for the 1, 2 and 3, we're used to the majority of these. I think everybody's in agreement that when it comes to the last point, which is the rent for the homeless accommodation, with it being nearly £3 million, it's a bit of a whammy of a figure. So what we've been able to ascertain then is that yes, it did go to housing, but for it coming to us, I think that because it is such a figure, then I think there should have been more of an explanation, whether it was just in an appendix or whatever else, which then meant it would have saved a lot of questions that people are asking. Also, as well, I know it's a historical debt, but we don't know how historical. Jerry's like right in the button when she's kind of saying, for us to manage our expectations for going forward, is this a historical debt, as in, is it 2 years, is it 3 years, is it 4 years, is it 10 years? For us, it's just like when things are put for us, whether it's monitoring or whether it's just for notifying us, for us to basically pass the papers, we need to be able to do that with all good conscience and knowing what it is that we're actually doing. I appreciate the hard work that officers are doing and the fact that they're making sure everything is as tidy as possible, and basically what you're letting us know is there's going to be more to come. So for instance, for whether it's council tax and non-domestic rates, blah, blah, going to housing rent and associated charges, we know that flags up at every single committee. Or is it now an expectation then, Craig, that for the rent and homeless accommodation that, okay, massive figure this time, and I know obviously we're now going to go off committees because we're going to wait to the next administration, but when it goes into the next administration, is it going to be a simple case of this is now going to be something that's going to sit as an item on this paper, because it's then going to now get continually reported on, which then means it's not an up-to-date debt, but still a historical debt, but then it's going to have, I don't know, we'll have, not that we don't have a handle on it, because I would never say such a thing, but it means that now that we've basically put a marker in the sand, that there's then going to be something after that. That's kind of where I want to get to my head, so I actually understand where it's at. So to put everything into place then, it's just like an appendix would have been helpful. And how many years is this accumulated debt covering? And is this something that's going to flag up on this report going forward? And I hope I've not missed anything out. If you could answer that, it would be lovely.
Yeah, of course. I can slip out additional information too, just in relation to your point around perhaps absence of an appendix. So in relation to the number of accounts covered with 2.7 million, that relates to 1,082 accounts. In terms of the periods covered by the tenancies, they go back to October 2010, at the very latest, covering it up to April 2015. As I mentioned now, during the course of the meeting, there will be further proposals. I think they will equate to quite significant figures, but that really is just a reflection of the exercise to look at the historical debt position. And going forward, Councillor, the expectation is that there will be many more frequent updates coming through, and I therefore expect a consequence of that for the amounts to be lower than what we're seeing just now. But just to reiterate my point from previously, that there is still debt of around 5.8 million that's been reviewed by Housing. So there will be further proposals coming to the committee that may well be in the realms of the figure presented today. But I think over the passage of time, during 2022-23 financial year, that will reduce markedly. But as I said earlier, in relation to debt is always there. You're always going to get a level of non-payment for whatever income stream it is we're looking to collect. So effectively making sure that the processes are in place to allow information to be given to committee on a more regular cycle going forward, and that's very much the intention.
Chair, could I just jump in again just for a subsequent, please? Craig, that's actually very clear. So just so that I don't make a mistake then, so at the moment you reckon there's about another like 5 million in debt that's going to come to the committee over the next year, but what you're saying is, like, don't just cap it 5 million, because this is something that is continuing, therefore it could end up being more than that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a handle on it now. Cheers.
Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, listen, thanks, Chair. And obviously not to take anything away right from the answers that Craig's given today, which have been very full, but taking up member suggestions and Councillor McAdam's suggestions, what I think we'll look to do with this as an issue moving forward, this specific type of debt write-off, is probably bring a joint report with the Director of Housing, right, potentially putting it to Housing Committee first, right, and then finding a mechanism to transfer it over here, because the reason it comes to this committee is that the committee has the power to write off the debt, right, so that we have a fuller picture of what it is that's happening and why, and that can be brought to members as a separate item. Right,
that would be super helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Eileen?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, Paul. I think your suggestion is actually is a very good suggestion, and I think it should be a very frank and honest first report to whatever we're going to Housing first and then here. I fully appreciate that it's comes to finance because it gets written off, and I did say at my very start, I understand that it never really goes away if people come back. We're looking for debt. We've been in an unprecedented situation regarding priority housing for 2 years, and then a new precedent was set with the rapid rehousing. And I would like to have warts and all whether these things have had you know, have sort of had an impact on how we are conducting our trying to conduct our business. And I know it was, they said it was historical, but how historical was it? And I think it was Councillor Jerry Gray, that said, you know, was it just new? How far back did it go? And does it look as if it's going to continue to rise? And I think if we need to know all that information so that we can get a good handle on, you know, what's happening and what's not happening, and even to explain that to, you know, the public, because when that goes into the public domain, if it goes into the public domain, well, it is in the public domain, sorry, if it's picked up, that's quite a staggering, you know, amount of money, and it's no, by no offence to officers, it's not really you that people's going to come phoning or whatever, you know, at 10 o'clock at night it'll be us, it's getting asked the questions. So I think what you said there, Paul, was good, but I hope it will be warts and all, whether the system's good, working, no working, or whatever. And again, if we really need to go back to the Scottish Government to say, well, by having to implement all this and this and this is what's happened, then I don't see there's anything wrong with it. I'm no political, as everybody knows, with a huge capital P, and I'm not trying to make it a political point, but I think we have to look at what's affecting us collectively as a council, and then take whatever steps necessary from there. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, I think Craig had mentioned it was from 2010 to about 2016, 2015, 2016, if I'm right.
Yep, 2015, Councillor. Yep.
Eric, you want to come in?
Yeah, I very much agree with what Monique said, actually. But it was just one other thing. I mean, she said in there, you asked us to note this, but actually you're not asking us to note this. You're asking us to agree to this. This is an item for decision. So we're actually making a decision to write off 2.71 million, and to do that without full information about what that 2.71 million for is not good. I don't want to use, I'm just telling you the language I want to use. It's not good to ask us that, to do that without giving us the full information. Now you've given us the full information, and that's great, but it has taken us half an hour of our time. If it had been in the paper more clearly, the history of it and what it was about and what we were being asked to do, probably would have saved an awful lot of time, and it would do so in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eric. Is there any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. I'll approve the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thanks very much. We agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, that takes us on to item 11, which is the procurement service. It's on pages 79 to 82, and Craig's going to take us through that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report is to provide committee with an update on the reasons for the increased workload within the Council's procurement team, and to seek approval for additional resources to address this issue and also identify workforce planning issues. Section 3 of the report provides some background, confirming that we operate a largely centralised procurement function, delivering a number of core functions, including supporting resources, identifying the most appropriate routes to market, of course managing the delivery of tenders, covering initial publication, responding to clarifications for potential bidders, assessing bids leading through to eventual contract award, of course compliance with procurement, the workload of the procurement team, which is deemed very much considerable and has been throughout most of 2021. So for the period April to September last year, there was 88 awards made for contracts over £50,000 in value, and that's in contrast to 61 for the same period in the 2 previous years, giving us an increase of 44%. Now that increase stems from 2 main things. One, obviously, as you'd expect, members, the natural backlog for procurement activity because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic during 2020-21, effectively leading to a real surge in demand coming from resources for procurement support. And also more broadly, covering kind of a wider timeline, the increase in requirements have came from resources to support them in relation to a number of wider strategic projects, notably City Deal, regeneration projects, and also education resources. The service also seen an increase in staff turnover during 2021. It's seen a loss of some very experienced staff. This then had a kind of compound effect and adding to the service pressures, and is very much a challenge that's been experienced across many public sector procurement teams over the past year or so. Recruitment is focused heavily on bringing in new graduates to build greater levels of longer-term resilience in the team, but also notably because of the challenges in recruiting experienced public sector procurement professionals. Additional resources were brought in during 2021-22 to deliver the procurement workload. That comprises a comment from Scotland Excel for an initial 12-month period, and also seeing a small number of projects being delivered directly by Scotland Excel. Despite this activity, there's still a need to identify additional resources to support, particularly education resources with their procurement requirements, and also to support City Deal projects and community benefits. So section 4 of the report provides the information in respect of the additional posts considered to be required to support the current establishment. That comprises 2 additional procurement officer posts. Just covering first of all the position in respect of education at 4.2. Over time, we have seen significant funding been allocated to schools, notably they are pupil equity funding and also the Scottish Attainment Challenge Fund. That's had a direct impact on the procurement requirements of education resources. As schools, you can imagine, look to identify a wide range of commodities and services to procure. That impacts directly on the resource required to coordinating the requirements, identifying new routes to market, creating and maintaining procurement frameworks, and conducting many more tender award processes. The arrangements we had in place for the early years service provision moved from a service level agreement to a procured service arrangement, and that had a direct impact on the resourcing from the procurement team. So overall, these increases coming from education in terms of demand for procurement support requires 1 post to be allocated to until support the procurement work described in section 4.2. Moving on to 4.3, for several years now, the procurement team has supported the tenure arrangements for City Deal, working with colleagues within Community Enterprise Resources and also Housing and Technical Resources. And a further strand of that work in relation to City Deal is also focused on delivery of community benefits. So previous City Deal projects have delivered community benefits for residents, for example, training, employability opportunities and local supply chain subcontracts. So the Council uses a dedicated system for monitoring and reporting on the delivery of City Deal community benefits, a system that is called Cenefits. This approach requires a dedicated resource to ensure we can make full use of the system's benefits on offer. With added advantage, this resource could also be used to benefit other council contracts. As a final point worth noting, the provision of a resource to deliver the arrangements for monitoring and reporting community benefits would also importantly support delivery of the Council's community wealth building strategy. Section 5 of the report provides employee implications, noting the 2 posts, both being procurement officers, and Section 6 covers off the financial implications and confirms the cost of the 2 posts met from existing budgets within education resources and also City Deal. If I can refer committee back to the recommendations at point 1, the need to increase the resources available to support the procurement activity for education resources and City Deal are noted, and the proposal to increase the procurement establishment within finance and corporate resources by 2 FTE procurement officer posts as detailed in section 5 be approved, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig. Is there any questions? Don't see any hands up. I'll approve the report.
Second it, Chair.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, that takes us on to item 12, which is the Development Officer Trauma and Informed Practice. That's on pages 83, 86, and Kay's going to take us through that one.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this report seeks approval to create a fixed-term development officer post, and that's really to take forward the important work that we've got around transforming the agenda around about transforming psychological trauma. And we know in terms of the occurrence of psychological trauma. It's commonplace in Scotland, and we also know the impact that can have on individuals. In terms of what's been found so far, services which are underpinned by trauma-informed practice can mitigate some of those impacts, and the aim is very much that all employees and employers ensure that aspects of service provision are trauma-informed and responsive, both in terms of the workforce, so the employees themselves, and in terms of customers or service users within that. So helpfully, a toolkit has been developed, and that's the framework that's mentioned within this report to support that important work. And likewise, helpfully, additional funding has been put in place to support it, and the Council is in receipt of a total of £100,000 of additional funding. So in terms of the Council position, we've signed the leadership pledge of support, and we've identified leads within the Council to take this important work forward, and made links with national and local groups in order to progress that. So it's on the agenda of our resource learning and workforce development boards, and a South Lanarkshire trauma steering group has been established, and at 4.2 in the bullet points you can see the makeup of that steering group, which includes a number of kind of important areas. So turning to the proposed post that we are seeking within this paper, the steering group has judged that the most effective use of the funding that the additional funding that's been received is to create an additional resource, so a post to take forward this important work. And at 5.2 you see the detail then of the tasks that we'll be asking this individual to undertake, and really just seeking Committee's approval for the addition of one development officer post to our establishment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kay. Are there any questions? Okay, I'll approve the report.
Second it, Chair.
Okay, items 13 to 16 are for noting. Are we happy to agree these collectively, colleagues?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I have no urgent business, but given that this is our last Finance and Corporate, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank all of my councillor colleagues for their participation and their contributions for this term. I'd also like to thank Paul and his officers for their support, and of course the admin staff in the background to ensure the smooth running of the committee. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
You have always been a very fair and lovely chair to everybody that was here. So big thanks to you as well.
I agree. Thanks, Gladys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gladys, my last committee.